a lot of blockers in the terms of in the form of Mog War Marshal, Munitions Expert, Snoop. Not you don't want to block with him, but when your opponent plays a turn 1 Goblin Guide and you get to play turn 2 Snoop and hopefully block, as long as you're not dead, that's that's really the goal, right? So, um, a lot of our combo pieces and you know redundancy effects kind of do double duty in a lot of these matchups just to gum up the board and block forever and buy us enough time to overwhelm people with just endless waves of goblins. So that's basically what this list is doing, and it's why I would recommend it. Now, as far as after Modern Horizons 2, a lot has changed, and a lot of people have started to adjust this list. Obviously, it's still possible to be successful with this. This is a 5-0 from September 21st, just a week or two ago. So it's still possible to be successful against some portion of the meta, but the meta has shifted to the point where mid-range decks super low to the ground with these new Modern Horizons 2 red cards like Dragon's Rage Channeler and Monkey, and Unholy Heat, which they don't need to turn on for it to kill everything in our deck. So it's like these decks, they interact with us really cleanly and efficiently, and we're kind of struggling to keep up and stabilize to get our ringleaders down against those types of decks. Then there's the Lurrus decks, which you should definitely be prepared for. We have good matchups against Lurrus decks because we have ways to remove Lurrus, and in the sideboard here we even have things like Tarfire that will that you can tutor up with your Goblin Matron, even because it's a tribal goblin, to kill Lurrus in that way. So you don't need a board full of goblins. And then I think the real boogeyman for us in the current meta, and it's why people are adjusting, or well, I guess it's so bad that some people choose not to adjust, but the real boogeyman is these Cascade decks. Rhinos and Living End. Living End we have an easy time against, but there's the Teamer Rhinos decks where they kind of just they smush us pretty badly. We'll get into that with some of our lists later and some of our sideboard choices. And then I guess I didn't mention one of the other elephants in the room, Urza Saga, the land. And there's a lot of sideboard cards that go into fighting that as well, but we generally just combo past all of the Urza Saga decks. We can generally interact well enough with most of the Lurrus decks that are just, basic value, but it's things like Dragon's Rage Channeler or Turn 1 Monkey or even Murktide Regent that we struggle with, like the bigger creatures that we have a hard time removing. So this is Ganja's list, which is like a very classic take on it. I think the next closest thing to this, because we're just kind of like we're gonna slowly branch off from this and see how people have adjusted. I think Harrison's list is the next closest, and it has an interesting the right one? Yes, it is. An interesting card in it in Grist the Hungering Tide. So do you wanna talk about that for a second, Harrison? Why you've included that?
Yeah. So, I'll be honest. I stole this one from you, Zam.
Oh.
Um, uh, I watched a stream of yours, and I saw the role that it filled in not only accruing like value over a lot of time, but also just uh providing an additional angle of attack that goblins has not traditionally been able to use because there aren't really like planeswalkers don't really work well in goblins. It's not generally compatible, and so we're already in green black because of ignoble. And so uh, as I understand it, you try this out to fill a hole in the meta where Munis Expert is good and can remove a lot of threats, but for cards that are sizable like Murktide Regent and don't and aren't be and aren't able to be removed by things like Fatal Push. which we traditionally run in the side, which a lot of people traditionally run in the sideboard. We don't really have an answer for a giant flyer,
Mhm.
and Grist provides that with its -2 ability, which allows allows it to destroy target creature. And on top of that, it provides us more use for our cards that aren't they're good early game. Mogwar Marshal is good at establishing a board presence. It's good with the munitions expert, but once they've entered, they're just 1/1s. They're just sitting there. We don't really have a use for them. And so now that we have a card that could just cycle through these stupid like 1/1s with good ETBs that are good in the deck when they
Mhm.
enter, but once they're on the board, they're kind of just sitting there. Um, it's provided a new use for them.
Yeah, so you claimed you stole it from me, and it's funny because I feel like I stole it from Canister, and in a really weird roundabout way. There's other people that are building Jund decks that are including Grist, but Canister recently had a lot of success with Elementals, which is sort of like a cousin of the Goblins deck. And for a while, we were just like the better tribal deck. And Modern Horizons 2 came around, and it printed all of those evoke elementals into the deck, and it changed the whole face of it to the point where they removed Aether Vial from their deck, um, and they replaced it with just value planeswalkers and ramp. Now they use Utopia Sprawl, which we could use, but we have this on tribe goblin in the form of Ignoble Hierarch. So um, I figured we would try to leverage the same type of thing, planeswalkers that start accruing value and can take over the game on their own. Because I mean, let's be honest, like the 1/1s that Chris makes aren't that scary, but we're mostly playing 1/1s already anyway. And if our deck is built to survive in that kind of environment, this is probably going to fit right in, right? So I think by leveraging this ignoble hierarch to give us a really powerful turn 2 play that could take over the game that wasn't Snoop, you just become that much more deadly, right? So before you stick an ignoble hierarch, and everybody has like totally set, like everybody agrees that ignoble hierarch is fantastic to include, but our turn 2 3 drops are like kind of anemic, right? They
Matrix.
are Boggart Harbinger, which we've said earlier is probably not the best if you're not comboing. It makes sure that you're not going to draw land, which in some cases is good, but on turn 2 is probably not even the most desirable thing half the time at least. And then there's Goblin Matron, which while it's good and it can search you what you need, you maybe don't know what you need on turn 2 yet, right? So Grist just gives us something else to play on turn 2 with our ignoble, and there's just more hands that look good. We have ignoble and Grist. Now, ignoble's hard to get to stick, but when it does, and you get out ahead with Grist, it's gonna feel really good. Um, but enough about Grist. There's another card in here which we've mentioned a couple times, um, which is Pyre of Heroes. I'm just gonna actually read Pyre of Heroes really quickly for people who don't know it. Um, it's Birthing Pod, but fixed. It's like a tribal Birthing Pod. So Pyre of Heroes is 2-cost artifact, and then for 2 tapping and sacrificing a creature, you search your library for a creature that shares a creature type with the sacrificed creature and has converted mana cost equal to 1 plus that creature's converted mana cost. Put it onto the battlefield, and you can only do it at sorcery speed. So that's an important part. I know a lot of people miss that because it's at the end after this big wall of text. But it's a tribal birthing pod. You sack a creature, you go 1 up on the mana curve. Um, and Goblins is obviously a tribal deck. So tell us more about like what you like Pyre of Heroes for, and like how you find it being useful.
As I mentioned before, we have a lot of cards with very good ETBs: Matron, Goblin
Mhm.
Matron, Goblin Ringleader, Munitions Expert, Mog War Marshal. But once they're down, there are just 1/1s or 2/2s. They aren't very good. Um, and they kind of just sit there. So what Pyre does is it allows you to so you play your matron, right? You search for whatever Snoop or Bogger Harbinger or Goblin Ringleader, but now you just have a 1/1 sitting on the battlefield. Um, but what Pyre lets you do is cash in that stupid 1/1 that's just sitting there and doesn't really have any doesn't really do anything except for count towards your goblin count for things like munitions expert. Now we can cash that in for a more valuable card, such as such as Goblin Ringleader,
Mhm.
or Sling Gang Lieutenant. And once we get to those that 4 slot, and we can start searching for Kiki Jiki. That's one aspect that's often overlooked is how good Kiki Jiki is just as a creature. Yeah, it's obviously very situational, and you don't want to see it in your opener. And it's often like kind of a mulligan unto
Mhm.
itself having Kiki Jiki in your opener. But if you draw them late game in a board stall when you have a munitions expert out or a ringleader out or a slinging lieutenant out,
Mhm.
you can really take over games that way.
Yeah, it's just endless value. And so I know Ganja recently, we just going back to his stock list, he has a new list where he plays 4 Pyre of Hero. It's the first he's testing it, so he's really excited. When Pyre first came out, we all tested it. I started with 4 myself. This was back before Ignoble was even in the deck. It's a great card. It's endless amounts of value. It gives you the endless chain of matrons and experts. Like you use your matron to search for munitions expert, you play munitions expert, you pyre the munitions expert away into another matron to get another munitions expert. You do that over and over again until you run out. So it's a great way to just like take over a board with endless value. But every copy after the first one you draw is pretty bad, and it's a pretty expensive card, even though it looks like it sits low on your curve. Kind of costs 4 mana to activate, sort of like another ringleader in that respect, and it looks almost like you removed one ringleader for one pyre, because I see you're running just 3 goblin ringleaders here as opposed to 4 that Ganja one. Um, Maybe that's like not the math you did in your head, but that's a good way to think about it for a lot of people, that it's sort of like more copies of Ringleader. So you want to be careful about that with your curve, and here you're playing just one. Um, do you want to talk about your sideboard? Because I mean, you have what looks like a pretty standard-ish sideboard, but there's an interesting card that Jay's been talking about a couple times in Patriarch's bidding, and we're gonna see his list right after this. But if you want to tell us like what you bring, what matchups you bring these types of things in for.
Yeah, totally. I'll go through each card. Fatal Push, obviously, is mainly there because of Monkey and the incredible advantage it gets if it's able to connect on turn 2. So having that there, as well as Tarfire, to
Mhm.
remove those important early game threats, um, is incredibly important. Um, so that's kind of my removal there. Warren Weirding is mainly there for Tron. There's a lot of Tron running around my meta,
Mhm.
and it's very good if your opponent's playing just one very very large creature. It can be good, and also has some utility. You can actually sack your own creatures to it, which doesn't come up a lot, but does have its uses. And those goblin tokens that it creates have haste, which is another important thing to know. Relic of Progenitus is what I'm using as graveyard hate. So that's for I know Dredge isn't very popular now, but turning off Delirium is important. Um, and also for decks like Living End, which are also running around. Anything that's it's looking to recur. The Esper Reanimator deck it's also relevant there. Um, so yeah, um, Thoughtseize also for Tron. Same with Crater Maker. Thoughtseize is also good against Living End, like I said, and also
Mhm.
other combo decks. Um, Mass Vandal also have a lot of Stoneforge decks.
Yeah.
Hammer Time, and uh, there are some very if your opponent is able to stick a geez, what is it called? Uh,
Caldra, is that the one you're looking
Cauldra.
for? Yeah.
You really can't win unless you're comboing as soon as they play it.
Yep.
There's almost nothing you can do because creatures can't block it. it's going to lifelink, so you can't really win with a more aggressive plan. You're done. Um, so having an out for that is good, as well as being able to. I've had some situations where I've been able to just loop it with Kikijiki, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
And although it does have a condition of exiling a creature card from your graveyard, that is pretty easy to fulfill.
Yeah, by the time it becomes relevant. It's I know a lot of people, they look at this card and they look at it as an answer to Urza Saga because it does kill enchantments, it exiles enchantments. Normally you can't hit Urza Saga specifically with it because it's too early in the game, something probably hasn't died yet. But for the things that it's useful against, things like Aldra or just big old Tron threats, by then something is dead. And for those who missed it, um, it's a green card. There's not a lot of green goblins out there. Not useful ones. This one is actually not even a goblin, but it is a shapeshifter with changeling. So you can tutor this up off Matron. You can find it off of Ringleader, and you can even pirate away. And in this list that we're talking about, you can actually even pirate away into Grist the Hunger Tide because Grist is an insect when it's vibrant. A neat little thing that you can do. But the last two cards, Fury, which is a new Evoke Elemental, kind of obvious, like, sure, it's a board wipe, but Patriarch Spinning, what kind of matchups do you bring that in for?
Anything where obviously people don't traditionally board in Graveyard Hay because that's not
Yep.
an angle that the deck typically attacks on. Although some people are playing on Earth now, so they might be a little less relevant. But it's very good against any kind of grindy matchup where at some point your opponent's going to tap out, possibly play a board wipe, wipe your board. Um, Anything where you're having a lot of creatures dies. I've had games where there have been 15 plus creatures in my graveyard, and getting to and because there's just so much removal flying, it's bad against. I'd say it's bad against like blue white control. I think I boarded in once again there, which was kind of a trap because um, it is going to get countered a lot of the time. You're not often going to be able to just
Mm-hmm.
play a giant spell like that, unless your opponent's really desperate. Um, but yeah, just the ability to like all those losses and creatures that have died over the course of the game, just to bring them all back at once, is pretty invaluable.
So are you bringing it in against, like, these Ragavan Saga type decks? Like Blue Red Murktide, they call it Zoomerjund, things like that?
Yes, most of the time, yeah. It depends. If you're on the play, I think that actually does play a role for me at least. If I'm on the
Yeah.
play, I'll definitely board in. But if I'm on the draw, it's kind of a toss up depending on what kind of build they're playing.
Yeah.
And if I'm worried that they're gonna, yeah, it kind of depends on what I've seen game one and what kind of DRC Ragavan deck they're playing.
Yeah, it's tough getting up to 5 mana. Something we haven't highlighted yet, and we haven't mentioned it, is the mana base. I see here that you have 4 unclaimed territories and
Oh yeah.
no Cavern of Souls. I'm assuming that this is like a budget.
Yeah,
Is
so
it?
this this is um the cards the lands that are on screen right now
Yeah.
isn't even my real mana base.
Oh.
My real mana base is so bad. It's like
Okay.
they're like 10-1 of duels. It's
Okay. That's
pretty
funny.
awful, and I didn't really want to put that all there.
No, I
So this is like
understand.
reasonably what I'm building to. I
Yeah.
eventually want to get caverns and replace my unclaimed territories with those. Um,
Yeah.
but
There's a lot of
yeah,
ways to
the
build a
mana
deck.
base it's funny because as you can see from this, discounting Ether Vial, which even now isn't a given because a lot of people started playing Unearth.
Yeah.
Discounting Ether Vial, you're playing like a $70 deck apart from the land
Right.
base.
No.
Um, it's so cheap if you can scrounge out yeah if without the mana base, which is really frustrating because
It is for sure.
yeah, it's a fun deck, and I think it falls in the modern trap of having just a really expensive mana base.
I-
Um,
If you were to not be Jund, just like to harp on that point for a minute. Like, if you're not playing Grist and Ignoble, like you can really get away with like just a black red version of this deck with an incredibly cheap mana base. Like, you can run mountains and swamps and
Oh
the
yeah.
double faced cards, and you can really go a long way with it because most of the power is in just the consistency, and you don't need a ton of fancy lands to really get there. But once you start splashing a third color, then your consistency goes way down unless you do, you know, get those lands. So it's definitely possible to do it both ways. But yeah, you keep mentioning Unearth, so I feel like we should pull up a list that has Unearth in it, just to do that. I think we're gonna start with, is this, where is the, okay, well, we talked about bidding actually. This one, let's start with bidding, just to stay on that string, because that was in your sideboard, and here we see Jbrumbaugh has it in his main deck, and he's got two thoughts. He moved a couple of your sideboard cards just straight into the main. So Jay, you want to talk us through like why you made those decisions, what your goal is with this deck, and like who you're trying to beat with it?
Yeah, certainly. So when Modern Horizons 2 initially came out and I was trying to build a new spin on Goblins with the new printed cards, I immediately saw Patriarch's Bidding as a card that I just absolutely loved in Standard and was really excited to see that printed into Modern with Modern Horizons 2. And so those who played with Patriarch's Bidding, I don't know if anyone here has played with the classic standard deck, but basically, as long as you have a lot of goblins in your graveyard, you can be losing the game absolutely terribly. And as long as you top deck that Patriarch's Bidding, you basically win the game on the spot.
Yep.
So it's just that incredibly powerful swingy card that suddenly goes from, well, it looks like you have no way of winning to all of a sudden, all right, well, I just won the game. And certainly the new goblins that we have with Sling Gang Lieutenant versus what we had in Standard allows you to immediately win on the spot when you resolve that spell. So this particular build, I had actually increased the number of Sling Gangs versus the Standard build up to 3 to have more sack outlets to work with Patriarch's Bidding. I also had 2 Skirk Prospectors. I know some builds have cut that down to 1, but I basically focused a lot more on the sack outlets in this deck to basically fill the graveyard as needed when Patriarch's Bidding comes up. And as for the other weaknesses described earlier of, well, so I can just counter it, that's also where the utility comes with Thoughtseize. So if I play a Thoughtseize and I remove their only way of stopping Patriarch's Bidding, then that means I can follow up with the bidding and win against those control matchups with that 5 mana card. So that actually is a factor, considering Patriarch's Baiting does cost 5 mana. It can be countered, but there are other support cards in the deck to make it to where Patriarch's Baiting is going to resolve every time you cast it.
Yeah.
So, um, and then that's also another spot where Pyre of Heroes comes in. So, Pyre of Heroes, obviously, it has a lot of great utility, as was previously discussed. But on top of that, with Patriarch's Bidding, all those goblins that you sacrificed can now go back onto the battlefield and makes Patriarch's Bidding even more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, this whole deck is around Patriarch's Bidding in a way. It's kind of focused in on it to make Patriarch's Bidding as powerful as possible. And because it's a 5 mana card, it is expensive. I've actually withheld Ether Vial in this particular build,
Yeah.
and Same Fire Heroes that is also very mana intensive card. So this build focuses more on the fast mana with Skirk Prospector and Ignoble Hierarch to churn out those cards a lot earlier in the game. So
So
oftentimes I find myself with the mana for Patriarch's Bidding, but I don't always have the goblins I need to win yet.
right.
Getting the mana for Patriarch's Bidding has been pretty easy with this deck.
Is there a set of decks that you would say this performs better against compared to, you know, um, a more standard build? Like, is there a problem that Patriarch's Bidding solves?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the decks that I find this deck does extremely well in are those control matchups. So blue-white
Hmm.
control obviously is packed with tons of counter spells, but it has enough threats that they have to
Yeah.
answer with Pyre Heroes. I had one game I literally played where blue-white control countered Pyre Heroes. The next turn I played Patrix Baiting and won the game.
Yeah.
Another game, blue-white control, I cast Thoughtseize, remove their counterspell, cast Patrix Baiting, win the game. So this deck is basically built with a lot of redundancy in order to work around answers that control decks would typically have to a big card like that.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you're still threatening them with your standard Snoop combo,
Right.
and you're still trying to find other ways, and you can still try and beat them down by just overrunning them with a lot of goblins and then drain them out with slinging. Especially because there's 3 slinglings in this deck, that line of play actually opens up more, where you're just putting enough chip damage and you just drain them out.
Yeah, that makes a
So
lot of
there's a lot
sense.
of ways to win with this deck, and it's pretty flexible. So that makes it, I think, a better build for metas where you have a lot of control decks or more grindy decks. Uh, where I've seen this deck struggle is those modern games that are just super fast. So if
Hmm.
you're dealing with Timber Rhinos, for example, or Cascade, so Cascade, even living in, can be a little bit of a tricky matchup because you don't have a lot of goblins in play when they cast Living End, and sometimes you can't get to 5 mana because of how fast their deck gets to Living End. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and then also Living End also plays Grief, which
Hmm.
discards. They get to pick a card in your hand to remove. So oftentimes that's Patrix Bidding. So that makes that matchup a little more difficult compared to what regular goblins would have, but it's really great in control matchups. It's really great in more mid-range grinding matchups.
Yeah.
But it does have its struggles with the really fast decks or decks that just disrupt your hand with Grief, for example.
Yeah, and I
So the sideboard is
oh
kind of
yeah.
built to answer some of those problem decks. So Engineered Explosives is really great at removing all of those Rhino tokens that are very problematic for the deck. So that's one very important sideboard card. Certainly, it also answers Hammer Time, and a lot of decks you'll find in the meta are Hammer Time or Rhinos. So that's
Yeah.
probably about a good 25% of your meta right there being answered by that one card.
Yep.
The next card, Alpine Moon, I actually have recently discovered since Modern Horizons 2 that that is very good at answering Urza's Saga. You plop that down, that is basically 1 mana Stone Rain. It's very
Yep.
powerful, and I think it's a very necessary card in the current meta because of how much Urza Saga there is. Uh, and it also does have uses too against Tron. You lay Alpine Moon, well, Tron can't get its Tron piece out.
Yep.
Same with Prime Time. You can use Prime Time to also take care of Valakut, so that way that doesn't kill you. So lots of little uses for that Alpine Moon.
Hmm.
Depending on your mana, you may or may not want it, depending on what you see. Fatal Push, I just like having that in the deck because it's a flexible 1 mana instant speed removal. Uh, it saved my butt a lot of times. For example, playing against Hardened Scales, someone just sacrificed all their pieces into an 11/11 flying creature they can't block. Well, here comes Fatal Push to ruin their day.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's a nice flexible card. Also, it kills Lurrus because I mean you're probably losing permanents anyway. So it's got a lot of versatility, and I just like having it in my sideboard. Uh, Spellbomb. It's actually kind of a split here between 3 Ley Lines of the Void and 1 Nihil Spellbomb. So the reason why I'm running Nihil Spellbomb in this particular deck is because I don't want to exile my own graveyard um, with Relic
Something
of
like a relic.
Genesis. So that I think is pretty much on the same level as that one card, except it doesn't nuke your own graveyard. So, and also another little factor about it is if you don't have any mana and you just absolutely have to get rid of the graveyard at that moment, you can just tap and sacrifice it, and you don't have to leave mana up to use it, even
Yeah,
though you
that is
don't
pretty.
pay the black and get the card. So it has that one little extra piece of extra usage that sometimes is overlooked by your opponent. And I also threw an extra Thoughtseize in there just to add more hand disruption. Mass Vandal, we already talked about that card. Blood Moon, that is obviously a very powerful prison piece for goblins that does a lot of work. Actually, even against Rhinos, you think, well, they have a lot of red mana, but on the other hand, all their Cascade cards are 2-color cards, and if you time that Blood Moon just right, if you look at this deck, it has 6 total accelerants. It has 4 Noble Hybrids, 2 Skirk Prospectors, so you can land a turn 2 Blood Moon and really ruin their day. Blood Moon also works just the same against Urza's Saga. It'll blow up all the sagas. And also it knocks out Tron pretty good. And Elementals is another deck that's really come on strong recently. They don't use Ether Vial anymore. If you land a Blood Moon, they basically cannot cast any of the cards in their deck except if they have a red elemental and that's it. So it's
Although
a very
I've
powerful
lost to that
card.
hard cast Fury.
Debate between 3 and 2, but I have 2 in this particular sideboard. Necromentia is a really fun card I really like. So again, taking advantage of the mana acceleration with the Noble Hierarch and Skirk Prospector. And also I didn't talk about this earlier, but with my mana base, I've got a card in here called Graven Cairns. So that makes any red mana into double black. So because of that, I'm actually able to use something like a Skirk Prospector, and all of a sudden I have 2 black mana to cast a lot of these really strong black sideboard cards. So going back to Necromentia, if I land that on turn 2, I can eliminate all the Rhinos in the person's deck. I can eliminate all the Living Ends in someone's deck. All these really powerful combo decks that just rely on one card to win the game. Necromancer does a lot of work. And also another thing that's a little overlooked on it is you can name non-basic lands. So you can even use it against Tron, take out their Tron piece, and you basically won the game that way too, because then they can't assemble Tron. So a lot of flexibility and versatility with that card. I just really love it. I think it's really great in this deck.
Yeah, it is neat. And would you say that this is a split? The 2 Blood Moon, 1 Necromentia split? I see, because a lot of people play 3 Blood Moons against, because it does, you know, it operates in a lot of the same matchups you were talking about.
Yeah, and I've even seen Necromentia pop up in other sideboards too since Modern Horizons 2. A lot of people kind of notice it's a pretty strong card with a lot of these really broken combo decks.
Yeah, for
Cascade. Sure. Crippling Fear is the next card I like. I got really excited about that when Kaldheim came out, and it doesn't seem like it does a whole lot on the surface because, well, it doesn't kill any creatures with 4 toughness, but there are just some decks, like Elves, for example, that are just flooding the board with all these really fast creatures just snowball. Crippling Fear is just one card that just wipes them all out immediately. And I've even found uses with it against Elementals. A lot of their Elementals are pretty cheap. Risen Reef is a 1/1. They've got a lot of 2/2 Elementals in the deck, a lot of 1/2 Elementals. The only thing it doesn't really eliminate is they got 2 Elementals that it does not take care of. One is Omnath, and then the other one is Endurance. But besides those 2 cards, Crippling Fear wipes their board, so it does a good amount of damage to Elementals and kind of helps you turn the corner, I found. Next card I want to talk about is Culling Ritual. So actually, this is a recent discovery. Certainly, you know, Rhinos, that's a lot of cheap permanents. You cast that, and you get a lot of black and green mana along the way. So you'll notice this deck runs Patriarch Bidding. Well, all that black mana can immediately go into Bidding, and you can immediately swing the board a huge amount doing that. Also, Boggart Harbingers, Sling Gangs, all those things will come out just right away. And if you have a Skirk Prospector out, well, sack it for a red first, and then you can cast a lot of Goblins just right there. So really nice card. And also because this deck doesn't run Ether Vial, it's not as much of a liability to use a card like that. So that's why that's in there. And then, I already talked about Leyline of the Void. You want to some decks like Living, and you want to mulligan every single time until you find that Leyline or Nihil Spellbound that at least buy you time until you can cast it. So I've taken this deck to 2 tournaments since Modern Horizons 2 has come out. First one was an 80-person tournament. I piloted to 8th place in a tournament. I was pretty happy with it. Then I took it to another Modern Horizons 2 tournament that had about 38 people or so. It also did pretty good in that one, and I piloted it to a top 4 finish. So I've been pretty happy with the deck pretty early on, and then I took it in paper format to Friday Night Magic immediately got a 3-0. I was really happy with it. But then since then, I played it a few more times in paper and then didn't do as well. I actually came away with 2 losing records the last 2 times I played on paper. So the problem I've identified with it is basically modern has now evolved to a point where it's all about that speed, and these games are just ending super fast. Or we have the my meta has a lot of Loris dress down. Dress down
Yep.
is really bad for our deck, and a lot of our creatures with ETBs just get completely negated by dress down. So with Loris, that just loops every single turn, and then on top of that, playing Death Shadow, which if you don't block it, you can take 13 damage. So there's some really scary stuff out there right now that basically I'm angling at more of a grist
Yeah.
type, grist unearth type build in the future for my next tournament because of how much Modern has gotten faster. But if
So
they ban a few cards, if Modern slows down, I'm probably gonna go back to this deck.
so let's pull well, so this is your version of the Grist Unearth package, but let's I just want to unpack a couple of the things you said about Modern being really fast, and like the speed of it coming way down, because the last 2 lists we're gonna talk about as far as Goblins goes are this list of yours and mine, which are pretty similar, but um, another reason that bidding list might be performing a little worse too, there's a ton of graveyard decks in the last 2 weeks that have popped up. There's the new Jeskai Phoenix deck. Living End is making a resurgence, at least online, because Gab Nassif won with it. And then the Esper Reanimator, like you mentioned, there's a new Innistrad card that's like it's Faithful Mending, which is basically a 2-mana Faithless Looting that has powered that deck up slightly. All the decks mentioned, actually, other than Living End. So people are a little bit more prepared for their graveyard, at least right now. And, that kind of ebbs and flows, as it always does in Eternal formats, where people, some weekends Dredge can win because people didn't show up with 3 Land of the Void in their sideboard. But right now, us included, we're coming prepared with that. So the speed portion of it, other than the graveyard, I think that's really important to touch on, because here's my list. We're just gonna start talking about this one off the bat, because I think it's a little bit simpler, and yours is almost like a further step down the line from this one. We mentioned earlier that Aether Vial was a core part of the deck, and here we are. Our last 2 lists don't have Aether Vial in them, and this one even is not even like going all in on bidding, and like there's reasons to remove it. It just straight up takes out Aether Vial for more copies of Grist and Unearth. And why is that? If you listen to other Modern podcast type content, maybe you've heard of Spider Space. He's in Aspiring Spike's chat all the time. He has his own Modern podcast, Mishra's Babble. You should go check that out. Him and Fran F. Peluche, and Everos, they talk about Modern every 2 weeks or so. But he's a Death and Taxes player, and he'll tell you Aether Vial is really bad in Modern now. You don't have to believe me. People better than me, or at least other people, think it as well. But why is Aether Vial bad right now? There's Prismatic Ending, which we don't have pulled up here, but Prismatic Ending is a new card from Modern Horizons 2 that can answer any permanent based on converted mana cost, and Aether Vial, basically, they take it out for 1 mana. There's also already Teferis that were bouncing our Aether Vials. There's people playing main deck Prismari commands and all of these blue-red polymorph lists, and there's also people playing Kolaghan's Command out of the sideboard in their Jund lists. But another thing about it is just the speed that you mentioned. Not only can they answer this Aether Vial more easily, but with the hyper efficient threats out there, you often, by the time your Aether Vial gets to 3 or 4 mana, or not even just necessarily damage threats, but combos, by the time your Aether Vial would be at 3 or 4 mana, you're either already dead, or you're at such a low life total that you're really walking a tightrope. And you're not necessarily going to win those games once you start vialing in ringleaders on 4. So what I've done with this list is I've removed Aether Vials. I have 2 less ringleader, or yeah, I 2 less than the max, I guess, ringleaders, because you can't really get to 4 mana as easily and have it be effective. A lot of the goblins we find aren't even effective anyway in those situations, but games are just ending a lot faster. And I've replaced the Aether Vials with Unearth. So we're going to talk about Unearth real quick. Unearth says return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you can also cycle it for 2, and it only costs 1 black mana. So all of our important cards for the combo are less than, or 3 mana or less, and Goblin Matron, which can find us other pieces of the combo, is also 3 mana or less. So now when you play your Snoop on turn 2, you can unearth it when they kill it, and maybe you can unearth it and do something else in that turn. Maybe you play a Matron and that gets killed, and now you have a 1 mana tutor, which is pretty crazy. So Unearth has just been really strong, especially with Grist, which, by the way, it's a Planeswalker, but you can Unearth Grist because it's technically a 1/1 insect in every other zone but the battlefield. So Unearth is filling Aether Vial's role of consistency for the combo, sort of protecting it. Aether Vial did it by making it instant speed with flash, making it harder to interact with, and just like making it deadly in that you can do it on a moment's notice or even with 1 land in play sometimes. But as that became less reliable, this other angle of Unearth, I think, has been performing better, for me at least. I think going forward, until something changes, I don't think I want to be playing Aether Vial, even though, in the best case scenario, Aether Vial makes 10 mana over the course of a game, but it's very hard to get there. It just doesn't really happen anymore. Just not the way games are turning out. And it's unfortunate, but I do think that like this way forward is a little bit better. I have a couple interesting things in the sideboard that kind of hit on all the same points as everybody else before. We have the same Blood Moons. We have Chalice here for the Cascade decks and for things like Storm or whatever. Sometimes you put it on 1, sometimes you put it on 0 for Cascade. It's pretty versatile. I'm only playing 2. Maybe you want 4. I don't really like the card that much. It doesn't really completely lock out any of the decks we really want it against. They can usually deal with it, so you don't want to go all in on that plan, in my opinion. Another interesting thing you can do, what I like doing, I actually bring this in against Elementals and Ephemerate decks because a lot of their value just comes from the card Ephemerate, which is a 1 mana card that blinks their stuff twice. And like, if you can shut off Ephemerate for any amount of time, you have a chance to really bully them out of the game. And then the only real new innovation here, I would say, is Crime Punishment. I actually stole this from Darkest Mage. He suggested this for Jund decks because it doesn't kill Wrenn and 6 when you play it, whereas Engineered Explosives does. But the reason I like Crime Punishment so much, and you can see there's 2 cards here. It's a split card from, I think it's Guild Pact, one of those original Ravnica sets. We're only playing this half, which is destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost X. If you play this on X equals 0, not only does it kill all tokens, it kills all Chalice of the Voids, whatever, it also kills Urza's Saga. So something that Engineered Explosive doesn't do is when you do it on 0, you can only deal with the constructs from Urza's Saga. This, if they play it out, you know that even if they left mana open for their construct, you're going to get both that and the land. And that's something I really like. It also kills Torpor Orb when you pump 2 more mana into it. It deals with a lot of problem permanents that maybe you couldn't deal with Engineered Explosives, but they're pretty similar. This is just what I happen to use. And it's good against rhinos, as good as you can be against rhinos, in that take out all of them. But any tokens, you can kill pithing needles with it. It's pretty versatile. I do bring it in against some of the aggressive red decks because on one board wipe sometimes you just blow them out there. But it's a really neat card that I would definitely recommend picking up. Just because of its versatility against Urza Saga. So then, going back to Jay's list, here's Jay's take on a list without Aether Vial in it. And he's got Pyre of Heroes back in it, and also this Unearth. What cuts did you make here to make room for all this? That's what I'm interested in. And have you taken this list out yet, or is this just what you're looking to play?
This is what I'm looking to play. So it's still, open to change.
Yeah.
I really like the Grist in the deck. I did drop it down to 2. I don't know if that's the correct decision or not, but I know I really
Yeah.
wanted 2 Pyre of Heroes in the deck.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also cut another Goblin. So those are the 2 main changes I made in order to fit in those 2 Pyre Heroes. So Grist, I really like Grist. If you just click on the card,
Yeah.
just to pop up all the abilities on Grist. Yeah, so not only is it a 1/1 like he was saying in every zone except for the battlefield, but if you look at the +1, so you're basically milling the top of your library. If you have a Snoop out, that is a very efficient way to get the exact card that you need with your Snoop.
Yep.
Or if it's another Goblin and you can't cast it just yet, if you have Unearth, then that's another great way to get a cheap Goblin out for 1 black mana. -2, that is very useful for our deck, just because we don't have ways of answering stuff that's like 6/6 or 7/7 flying. But this card gives us a way to answer those massive creatures that are just beyond the range of our munitions experts. And also it hits planeswalkers. So if there's a Teferi on the board and you need to get rid of it, and if you leave it out, it just takes over game. But with Grist, it gives you a fighting chance to just take out that planeswalker. So it's got a lot of versatility, and of course the -5. It's that also comes up. You just do 2+1s, and sometimes -5. That's going to win you the game. So I
Yeah.
really like the flexibility of Grist, and that all of its abilities are relevant for what we're trying to do, and for just it basically adds a lot of value compared to other planeswalkers that are printed in the modern for our
Oh
particular
yeah, for
deck.
sure. And it's really interesting that all 3 of us, I'm gonna try and pull up his list again. I gotta find it. Harrison, you and I have sort of converged on this shell that has at least some number of Grists in it, and
Yeah.
maybe Pyre of Heroes or Unearth, depending on how you want to get your value.
Yeah, it's interesting how, I mean, like, you look at our list and there are just so many. I mean, we both, all 3 of us, kind of start out with like 30 or so of our non, or yeah, around, I'd say around 30 of our non-lands kind of already set for us. We're all playing
Mhm.
4 Ignoble. We're all playing 4 Snoop. I think we're all playing at least 3 Munitions Expert, all 4 Boggarts, all 4 Matrons, at least I think 2 Ringleaders, except for that last list that Jbrumbaugh showed. 2 Sling Gang, 2 Kiki Jiki, and like that part of the deck has kind of been, we've all decided that that's what the deck is. Like that is what that's what's good. But then there's these 7 slots that we keep moving around, testing different things in.
Yeah.
And you sort of touched on this earlier, like you know, the Goblins is a good deck to play because like one of the best things about playing Goblins is you can kind of try out so many different things. There's a lot of different directions you can go with the deck. There's a lot of different cards you can test out and play.
Yeah, and depending on what your meta is, you really it's very intimidating, which is part of the reason we're making this video, because you more than most decks, I would say, because you have the ability to tutor so many cards up with Goblin Matron, and really swing a lot of matchups by just including maybe 1 Masked Vandal in your sideboard or something like that. There's a lot of Goblin answers out there that you can put into your sideboard to deal with things. um, you're really constructing your whole 75, and you're playing with whatever cards are in your main deck or that you've boarded in all at once, because you do tutor so often, either with Goblin Matron or Pyre of Heroes. So there's a lot of crazy lines. There's a ton of value to be had. It's I won't say it's like the most difficult deck to play, because it's not even important how difficult it is, but there's a lot of freedom and creativity you have with not just building the deck, but playing the deck, and finding how you want to navigate the game is a big part of it. Well, you were saying that we all settled on 3 to 4 Boggart Harbingers. When I play 4 Boggart Harbingers because I want to maximize, you know, my matchup against combos and just my oops I kill you type things. But if you're comfortable with more mid range stuff and you don't think the combo is likely, you know, cutting down to 3 here like Jbrumbaugh does, like that makes sense. It's viable for sure. And you can lean on the rest of your deck, and you know 3 is enough to find Harbingers. Just you will see it in your opening hand. Can't remember what percent less, but a little bit less often. Um, and I've chosen not to do that, and I go all the way up to 3 on Grist because I'm trying to get those openers that are lightning fast ignoble hierarch into Grist, or lightning fast conspicuous Snoop into Harbinger, and like that's kind of where I'm focused, because I think, like we were mentioning, Modern is hyper fast, hyper efficient right now, and we're a deck that sort of tries to go over the top of people if we're not sneaking in a win with combo. So we kind of have to do what we can to at least get on the board early, force them to deal with us so we can maybe grind them out later or something like that. So I think, looking to the future, I think it's definitely hopeful for Goblins. I think we're actually in a great spot in the meta right now, how everybody's playing it. There are some real nightmare matchups, but when control is big, Goblins is good. It's always going to be that way just because of the way it operates. It's embarrassing for them to have to spend Supreme Verdicts on just one little Mog War Marshal or something like that, but you can force them into that situation pretty commonly. When Living End and combo decks are big, we're going to be good. I think we're all trying to figure out, and it's not just us, it's the rest of Modern as well. We're trying to figure out how to deal with the new free elementals and Ragavan, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Murktide Regent. A lot of people are calling for bans. Probably is not going to happen anytime soon. So we're just all looking for the answers. There are a couple places I look to for inspiration, though, as to like how to deal with that. There's, for people who are interested in it, Aspiring Spike, obviously most prolific Modern streamer. He's responsible for a huge number of the decks that people play in the first place. He has this Jund Sacrifice list, which is very similar to our own list, although it doesn't look like it at first glance. You can see he's got Unearth in his deck. He's got Grists in his deck. He's got, obviously, Ragavan and Noble Hierarch, which we don't have. But there's, believe it or not, a lot of these are sort of, there's a, like, analogous to the cards that we're playing, in that he has these cards that you can play very early to take over the game. And he's got Seasoned Pyromancer instead of Ringleader for card advantage. And he's got Mayhem Devil instead of like Munitions Expert. So a lot of this is sort of almost the same, but obviously you pilot it differently. But the point I'm making is, when you look how he's dealing with the rest of the meta at his sideboard, you can see a lot of the same things. There's the Culling Ritual from before. He decides to bring in Fulminator Mage just because of his style, but that's where our Blood Moon effects come in. The 2 Chalice of the Void, Void Mirror type effects, and the Graveyard Hate. They happen to be able to leverage Endurance because they have more green spells than us, but maybe we'll be there eventually. But for right now, we're on Leyline of the Void. So when you're constructing your sideboard, like, don't just look to the Goblins list. Look to other things, and to even to bring that a little further out, this happens to be the same colors, but I said 5 color elementals was our cousin before because they're another tribal deck. Now, this one isn't specifically about sideboarding, but to see the direction that really good players like Canister have taken with the deck by removing Aether Vial and adding these 3-mana Planeswalkers, and, you know, their own ramp, it kind of gives you a clue of maybe what you need to do as a tribal deck to operate in this same restrictive meta of hyper efficient mid-range and combo decks. So I guess we could open it up to discussion, but I don't know if there's more. I haven't seen any questions in the chat. If people have questions, we could go there and we can go on all night. But maybe we're wrapping up. Are there anybody that wants to raise their hand in the Discord just to even flex that feature out?
Or yeah, you can raise your hand in the what is it called? Discord stage, or you can type in Zam's chat.
Yeah, I'm reading all of it. But thank you everybody, just first of all, for coming out and listening.
Definitely.
I'm just gonna post this. I'm gonna chop it up, put it on YouTube so that you don't necessarily have to watch all of it.
All 1.5 hours.
Yeah. But it's been like really enlightening, like hearing people talk about, you know, their struggles and matchups.
My bad.
What's that?
We had a raised hand in the Discord. Alright, I'm inviting Goblin to speak.
Goblin. Alright, as soon as you get on stage, let us know your thoughts. You're muted and deafened, but sort that out. Maybe he just wants to get on stage.
Can you hear me?
How's it going, Goblin?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yo.
Hey, so I kind of joined stream a little late, but my question was, have we thought about collected company?
Yeah,
build?
so you'll notice the spike list I pulled up before had collected company. I could go off about collected company for a minute. If you could mute the stream in the background, so it's
we're hearing an echo.
So collected company is an interesting Magic card. It's obviously very powerful. I'll read it for a second so that we all know what we're talking about. You look at the top 6 cards of your library. You put 2 creature cards with converted mana costs 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield, and you put the rest of them on the bottom of your library in any order. So our deck, I mentioned before that Unearth was good because we have a lot of creatures that are 3 or less. This card, Collected Company specifically, shines when the creatures you're getting are at a really good rate for 3 mana. And I think the issue with Collected Company from most Goblins builds, and that's not to say there isn't one out there that we haven't found yet, but the issue is that Goblins in general are really bad on rate. We have 3 mana 2/1s and 3 mana 1/1s and 3 mana 2/2s and things that are not necessarily going to be good when you hit them off of Collected Company the same way that Skyclave Apparition might be, or even something like out of Elves, the Shaman of the Pack, which, you know, draining 2 life, just 2 is already, you know, it's decent. So Collected Company doesn't shine in our deck as easily because of that. Now, is it maybe better than Unearth? It's possible. Like it could be, but you know, Collected Companying into Mogwar Marshal and Skirk Prospector is like not really impressive, and it's got even Collected Companying into Snoop and Munitions Expert can be pretty lackluster on some board states. Now you get one of your combo pieces in play, but for 4 mana, it's tricky because a lot of our combo prowess is that it comes out fast, and yeah, we want to flood the board, but some of our more expensive 3 mana cards like Chieftain, War Chief, they're just not exciting. Like, they're really good synergistically, but when you don't get to pick which one you're getting, and they're not great on rate in the first place, it's tough. But if there's older versions of the deck, like Grumgully versions of the deck that operate better with Collected Company because you don't need haste to get your combo off with that. But those combos, they actually are not 2-card combos the way Snoop Harbinger is. They're 3-card combos, so they're like, you're kind of gimping your combo to maybe get a little bit more value, but you're making it harder to set up. Some asked the question, is Coco better than Ringleader? Obviously, they both go in the 4-drop slot. That's what invites the comparison, and they both kind of draw cards. In this meta, it's possible that Coco is better than Ringleader, but some of the strengths of Ringleader that really shouldn't be forgotten is that you can tutor it up with Matron, so you find it when you do need it. You can play it off the top with Conspicuous Snoop, so it's free cards. And like, it's very difficult for us to find our non-goblin spells later in the game because we don't actually draw cards in our deck. Like, that's something to really think about with us in general. So the only way to draw cards is to just keep the game going longer.
Yeah.
And
And
so if you're confident you can get the game going longer in the first place, maybe there's better, more reliable answers like bidding. But Coco is certainly something that you could explore. Just the reason it hasn't worked yet is the rate problem that I've mentioned.
yeah, I think there's a very high I definitely agree with everything you've been saying, and the high ceiling of getting like doing it on the end step, getting a Snoop and like a creature, and then the next turn, or Snoop and Harbinger even, because then you could do
Yeah.
that on the upkeep. That will sometimes just win the game, and that angle is good. But the times when you flip 3 lands, a Mog War Marshal, Skirk Prospector, and Pashlik Mons, like, you're not really getting much there. Like, you're like the decks that really utilize Coco to its full effect, like Spirits, where you already have a lot of creatures that are good at instant speed, and you can really capitalize on playing on the other person's turn and establishing a huge board in the air at a moment's notice. This is where that card shines, and Goblin simply doesn't have that explosiveness because we're not the historic deck that's playing 8 Haste Lords. And if you do want to retool the deck to accommodate more Coco, play style, you could definitely do that. But I think at least in a deck that looks anything like what we have right now, I just don't think it fits.
But I'm scrolling through and there's like not even Coco decks in the meta, so maybe there's another reason. But like, Heliod Company was a combo deck that used to play Collected Company. It's fallen out because it's kind of not fast enough. Like, it sounds crazy, but because they were capable of turn 3 comboing as well, but it's a little bit rarer than ours. They were playing it, but they have some like serious, like, real value hits that can't be dealt with in the form of Skyclave Apparition,
Yeah.
Ranger Captain, which is a 3/3 for 3, which isn't above rate on its body, but then it also does the whole tutor thing that we do. They have Heliod, which is really hard to remove. They have Auriok Champion, which is really hard to remove. They have a lot of Coco value that we don't get just because of the rate problem I mentioned. Like, Cocoing into 1/1s that, it's just tough. It's possible. It's possible that, and I hope it's really not the case, but it's possible that we need to be going so heavy, like turbo into combo, that, yeah, just having something that looks through the top 6 cards for Snoop and Harbinger and maybe puts them into play is where we should be. But I don't actually think we're there yet, just because we're consistent enough on the other combo fronts, and then that actually is not good versus this extremely heavy removal of the blue, red, black, red, all those types of Ragavan, Murktide decks that are kind of dominating them, even Rhino. We just, our stuff won't survive after cocoing into it, and you know that's not the problem that humans or spirits or Heliod have to deal with, and we do. So yeah, just getting the threats into play. Maybe Coco's not the best, but it's again, the reason you might want to play it is just because it's so important to keep digging, and it gets them right into play, whereas Ringleader just puts them into your hand. But that was a good question. Thank you for that. Is there anything else we want to touch on before wrapping this up? Has that Coco question sparked anything? Any of your brain?
Not for me. I think
yeah,
I think we covered a lot of really good stuff today.
yeah,
And
I think so
thank
too.
you for everyone who tuned in.
Yes, thank you everybody who tuned in. Thank you Jay, and thank you Harrison. Harrison set this all up, so big thanks to him. I'm glad we could get this out there. As the meta shifts, maybe we'll have something important to bring up. Going forward, you know, my recommendation would obviously be this list that I pulled up. I guess Harrison and Jay have their own lists. Here's Jay's, just for like that last screenshot for you guys. We're pretty much on the same page here with Pyre. If you can't give up your vials for unearths, you'd stick with Harrison's list with the 4 Aether vials. But yeah, maybe I guess the big change is you should try out Grist, because it kills Murktide Regent. It kills Murktide Regent. It kills Omnaths. It kills a lot of things. It kills Dragon's Rage Channeler every time. It's not just not like conditional. So yeah. Anyway, thank you everybody. Guess we're just gonna cut it here. So thanks for joining. Join us on the Goblins Discord. It's been going.
Yeah. Oh, there's probably going to be some more events. I don't know if we can get some 8-whack people talking about that deck. I know that there's a few less levels to that, but you know, I recently joined the mod team, and I'm interested in like, you know, bringing some more spicy fun stuff to the server. So yeah, join if you haven't already, and if you are already here, look forward to some fun stuff to come.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks again for organizing this, Harrison. Yeah, it's been good chat.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming. Thank you to everyone who listened in. Thank you to all our YouTube viewers who are listening right now. Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody. See you next time.